Okay, Friday, 26th of December 2025. So, Adrian's daily vlog, sharing smart stuff men should know. Descriptive versus prescriptive. Now, about a year or so ago, I did a video about the is ought problem. And anything that is doesn't necessarily mean it has an ought. This is white or this is comfortable doesn't mean it ought to be a bed, it ought to be a chair, it ought to be a cushion, something like that, nice and simple. But over time, I realised there's another way of looking at it with regards to prescriptive or descriptive attribution of ideals or standards or values. Something that, interestingly, would have come in useful about 15 or so years ago with as a mental model, as a framework, but nonetheless. So the interesting descriptive and prescriptive. Very straightforward, really. Descriptive is to describe something as it is. As it is. Its first principles. That's important. Breaking it down to its first principles, being essentially, you could argue, reductionist with regards to what this is, the measurements, the dimensions, the weight, these things, these binary things, these quantifiable things, not so much qualitative but quantitative, things we can measure, and empirical things that we can judge and we can estimate and use for calculations, and we can use to get a precise measurement and use for further calculations to very modular plug it in elsewhere. That's important to understand as a mental model to describe something as it is, because the opposite of that is prescriptive, meaning we're prescribing a meaning onto something. It's almost rationalism, I think, in a way, with regards to this ought to be because a higher power says so, or beliefs or standards or culture or values say so, or dictate it to ought to be something in a way. Oh, this is wood, it ought to be, it ought to be, it ought to be, it ought to be that, it ought to be used for this, ought to be this. It's that prescribing of value as opposed to coming to the conclusion based on what it is. Oh, this is dense, it is heavy, it is cheap, it's affordable, therefore it could be used as a chair, for example. Very nice. Oh, this is flimsy and soft and fragile and brittle. No. This is better used, better utilized as something else. Better used as glass, for example, or a mirror. So then you could say, right, well, in one way, societies, through first-hand experience, have kind of come to the conclusion that these things are best suited as that. That's why we use, say, no doubt, certain kind of sand, for example, to make mirrors, certain kind of sand to make glass, complete different kinds of sand. Just society, through innovation and technology and survival of ideas, basically, has decided that this kind of sand is best for windows and this kind of sand is best for glass. It's just most durable, let's say. And they've realised that, oh, this kind of wood is good for ships, wooden ships, and this kind of wood is good for chairs and tables, furniture, things like that. So it's inadvertently, through her first-hand experience, recognising that these things have certain properties that are best suited for that behaviour or this usage. Nice, very important. Where we can get lost is when we start applying prescriptive things as to jump ahead to conclusions, philosophically, moralistically, empirically, societally, you name it, meaning this thing, oh, therefore it is best used in that way. Oh, this kind of sand is best used for glass, being dogmatic. Key word there is dogmatic. We're jumping to conclusions as opposed to studying, understanding, testing, verifying. That's that empirical side again. Verifying, does it work? Can we quantify it? Can we put a number on this and say it works to this extent, or it works under these circumstances, this condition, or these conditions, etc., etc. You've got to be careful with that. And a good example of that, oddly enough, is Bitcoin, because a lot of people will come at it from a prescriptive lens, imposing meaning onto it, what they think it ought to be or what it ought to do, instead of looking at it from the first principles and measuring in this context, this connotation as to what it actually is. Oh, it's money fixed supply, apolitical, decentralized, no central point of attack, censorship resistant, things like that. Very nice. Money you can spend, etc., etc. And then using those as the building blocks, just how in the same way society has determined this kind of sand is best for mirrors and that kind of sand is best for glass. Real technical lens. As opposed to, oh, Bitcoin, it ought to be this. I think it's this. I believe. Keyword there is believe. And really, you could go deeper to say, whenever people start using that word in a sort of argument, you know by default, right at the get-go, this is an emotional argument, an emotional conversation, as opposed to a logical, rational-based one with regards to this is, or it has, a fixed supply. Therefore, as a logical conclusion, to go beyond that, there's a limited number of them, therefore it is scarce, by definition. Very interesting. So that's an interesting thing to look out for in life. Prescriptive and descriptive conclusions on things we see, have, interact with, understand. It's very important to understand. Essentially, this conclusion we're coming to, are we coming to it via human tradition and a desire, a thought, or a feeling, or a passion, or is it based on logic, maths, and quantifiable data? Case in point, one little interesting story. A few years ago, a client of mine asked to verify some data, some numbers on hours, whatever, or some basic arithmetic, and she asked me, this is the number she came to, and I came to another conclusion elsewhere, and she asked me, what do you think? And I said, and I'm quite proud I did this, I said to her, no, it's not what I think, it's what the data, what the numbers, what the math shows. It doesn't matter what I think, because think implies opinion, subjective opinion. What is the data? What do the numbers reveal? That is what I was letting me guide me with the decision making in this situation. Rather than prescribing what I wanted, I was prescribing. I was describing what the numbers were revealing and using that to lead me and come to a decision. Very powerful, very important. But otherwise, Adrian's daily vlog, sharing smart stuff men should know. Subscribe for more, and you will see me tomorrow.